Hallelujah. Let Lord Jesus Christ shine forth. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us. Welcome to another live stream with DCCI Ministries. And we have the privilege of having Robert Spencer from Jihad Watch with us. Peace of Christ be with you, sir.
And with your spirit.
How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
By God's grace, I am good. Thank you. I heard that Twitter have some problems with you. And also, I heard that you are writing new book. Did I hear those
Yes.
things correctly?
I think I said that on the last show with David Wood. Muhammad, a critical biography. It's an expansion or an extension, I should say, of the first biography I wrote of Muhammad, The Truth About Muhammad, and then Did Muhammad Exist? This is a combination of those two approaches and an exploration of the life of Muhammad from a historical standpoint. How much of it can we regard as historical, which is about none, and why that is so.
Okay. And when will that come out?
Next year. I don't have to turn it in until December 1st. And so it's May 26th today. I'll be working on it all the rest of the summer and the fall, God willing.
So you can write a book within 7 months?
Oh, that's plenty of time. I don't need that long. But I have so many other things to do that I'll probably end up turning it in on December 1st. But I could probably, if I didn't do anything else, I could finish it by July 1st.
Wow.
Well, it's...
Well, I am very grateful to God for the people he puts in our lives. Like, you've got lots of gifts and skills. You write a book within 5 months.
Thank God, but it's nothing extraordinary. It's just that I've been doing this very long, and I know where all the sources are. I know what I want to say. It's just a matter of putting it down on paper.
Well, we can't wait to get it, for you to write it, and then we get it and then read it and use it. So thank you very much for this coming contribution to the kingdom. So today, I thought we talk about history of Islam, but how Ottomans practiced Islam and how Ottoman kind of started. I think it was just 5 minutes before the live stream, someone sent me a video, which getting the notification of the live stream about history of Islam within 7 minutes. So I didn't have time to watch all of it. I just watched the beginning and the end. It was finishing with the statement that Ottomans ruled for 600 years, and it set the example for the religion's tolerance. And then religion's tolerance. So it was like Ottomans were able to live with, Ottomans were able to live with Christians in a peaceful way. And then I was grateful that I didn't watch that 7 minutes video.
That would have been a waste of 7 minutes, yes.
I know. It's good to watch the beginning and the end. So is it correct that Ottomans were, as they ruled and as they reigned for 600 years, they were very good with other people of other faith?
You know something, Hatun, if you look at Nigeria today, you see the Muslims doing jihad raids practically every day. And they kill a number of Christians and they drive the Christians out of the area. I was just reading a story about a 3-day jihad rampage in a state in Nigeria where 200 Christians were killed and 32 Christian communities, Christian villages, were cleared out. The people fled who weren't killed. Now, this is happening right now in Nigeria. And it's the same thing that happened in the Ottoman Empire. And it's the reason why we look at Turkey and the other Ottoman lands that they ruled and see that it's 99% Muslim, because that's what they did to the Christians who were there. And so you look at the Ottoman Empire had roughly the same geographical extension as the Eastern Roman Empire or Byzantine Empire, which was just the Roman Empire, actually, that continued until 1453 and was a Christian empire. And it was Christians who lived in what became the Ottoman domains. But now, if you look at those domains, particularly Turkey, but also the Middle East in general and North Africa, you don't have very many Christians. Where did they all go? The Ottomans made life so miserable for them under the rules of dimitude that most of them converted. Many of them converted. Many of them fled. There were also these same kind of raids that I described as happening in Nigeria, happening on a regular basis. Like I believe the last time we did a show, we spoke about the Battle of Manzikert, which was the catastrophic defeat of the Roman army by the Seljuk Turks in 1071, and the Ottomans supplanted the Seljuks. And it was after that the Romans did not have the military force to protect their people in Anatolia, in Turkey, what is now Turkey, Asia Minor. They weren't able to protect them. And so the Muslims would come in and carry out a raid in the area and kill people and enslave some people and convert some people to Islam, and other people would flee and they would take their homes. And this happened all across Asia Minor until the whole thing was Turkish. But actually, historically, from time immemorial until the 15th century, when the whole thing was completed, but really actually not even until the 20th century was it completely cleared out, so that there's just the tiniest remnant of Christians there. But it was Christian land that was 99% Christian, and it was conquered by the force of arms. And it was not that these people converted because they were persuaded by the glories of Islam or the beauty of the religion or the beauty of the Quran or the wisdom of Muhammad. Nobody was converted by that. They were converted by force or converted because it was so difficult to live as a dhimmi under the rule of Islamic law. And that's what the Ottomans did. It's just exactly the same thing happening in Nigeria today, and that has happened so many other places in the world. And so just one last thing on this point. There are a lot of practices among the Turkish Muslims that actually come from the Orthodox Christians, because they are the Orthodox Christians. For example, it's common in some areas of Turkey, particularly, I believe, around the Pontus, around the Black Sea, that they have the open casket at the funerals. This is not Islamic, it's a Christian practice. And they don't even realize that they do it because they were Christians who were converted to Islam forcibly. And a lot of Turks nowadays are taking DNA tests that are now so easily available, and they're discovering to their horror and shock that they're not Turkish at all. They're not Turks from Central Asia, they're Greeks. And they're Greeks who converted to Islam. You may be one yourself.
You never know. Thank you very much, first of all, bringing our attention to what is happening to our brothers and sisters in Nigeria because of the ideology of Islam. So those of you who are listening, who are watching, or who will listen in coming days, please remember our brothers and sisters in Nigeria in your prayers. We live in a very comfortable part of the world, but not everywhere it's comfortable as we are here. So Islam is not that much nice religion, even with the Ottomans. How did these Ottomans kind of started? Like, where did they come from? Within like 600 years, they were able to take to North Africa, to even to like near Ukraine, Hungary, like it was very big empire to almost to Persia. So where did they come from?
Well, they are Central Asians, actually. That's I said a minute ago that a lot of Turks are discovering that they're not Central Asians, they're Greeks. And the real Turks, the Ottomans and the Seljuks before them, they actually do come from Central Asia. You can look now at the modern nation of Turkmenistan, which was a Soviet republic and then became independent in 1991 after the fall of the Soviet Union. And it's in Central Asia. Now, the Turkmen and the Turks are the same thing. And the Turks are the ones who came west. And it was a mass migration like we see in Europe today. And as they came west, they encountered the Roman Empire and made jihad against it. And then they won this big victory in 1071. And then later the Ottomans continued to press against the Roman lands, and ultimately in 1453 took Constantinople and destroyed the Christian empire altogether. And so starting actually before that, because they encircled Constantinople before they conquered it, they entered in Eastern Europe and conquered the Balkans. And then after they conquered Constantinople, consolidated their holdings in Eastern Europe and began to expand against Central Europe. And of course, there's the famous battle that most everyone knows about nowadays, the battle at the gates of Vienna in 1683, where the Ottomans were defeated by a coalition of Christian forces, Poles, Hungarians, and others from Central Europe. And that was the high water mark of the Ottoman expansion into Central Europe. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all that only 10% of the Turks are Turks, because they're conquered people. And you see, the whole idea of dimitude is to make life so miserable for the non-Muslims. And they see that it's easy if all they have to do is convert to Islam, and then everything is okay. Then they don't have to pay the tax. They don't have to suffer all the discrimination. Everything's good. So most of the non-Muslims in places like Egypt and Syria, they converted to Islam. And it's the same thing in Turkey, but they don't realize this because the Turks have systematically erased the historical memory from the people. For example, my family is from Chesme, near Smyrna, Izmir. And the Greeks there had lived there. So you read Homer from however many thousand years ago, and he's writing in Greek and about Greek people, and they live in what is now Turkey. And they lived in the area where my family is from. And I read a book a few years back. It's I'm not even going to name the book because actually the author does not have any idea about why all this happened. She just wrote about how it happened, but got very angry with me when I pointed out that it all had to do with Islam and said I was a bigot and a racist and so on. So it's not even worth naming the book. But the book was very interesting because it was a book written by a Greek woman about the same age as I am, and her grandparents were exiled from Turkey as the same as mine were, and she actually took her grandmother back to the village where she lived, where she was born and grew up, along the Black Sea, the Pontus, the Pontic Greeks. And they went to this village and they asked, where were the Greeks' homes? Where did the Greeks live? And the people in the village told them there were never any Greeks here. No Christians lived here. But they did. They lived, not only did they live there, but this was a woman who had actually been born there and grown up there. But they erased it all and they lied to their own people about it so that they don't have any idea about where all this happens, why all this, where they came from and how they got there. And so then they take these tests and find that they're not Turks, and it's a total shock. It's the same thing with the Egyptians. I'm sorry.
The history we learn at school is very, very different than what I learned after I left Islam. So lots of things was very new to me, but just even though you were exiled, your family is exiled from their homeland. I'm still Turkish. All I can say is you and me, we are one in the kingdom of Lord Jesus Christ. So we can still come together and then bring glory to our crucified and risen Lord. So that makes Christian faith unique.
Absolutely.
So wouldn't you, no, I can't say that. So
There's
would
something
you,
can't say.
Turkish government is just be hunting me. Would you not
Oh,
think
goodness.
that,
I'm sorry. I thought
would
the
you not
British government was giving you enough trouble.
would you not think, for example, I don't know the English term for that, when Ottomans were taking Christian boys and putting them in the army and then sending them back to their land to kind of murder their family stuff. For that kind
Yeah,
of coalition, Yeniçeri, yeah, for that coalition, wouldn't you think Christians and Muslims were living in a friendly, having friendly lifestyle instead of like there was any force or there was any dimmici?
but you're talking about Devshirme.
Yeah,
Okay, well, that was
because
not. What's that?
no, I'm asking this because I heard there was a Muslim scholar was discussing about the Ottomans and how Ottomans sets the example to us in 21st century
Oh,
regarding living with the different faiths
yeah.
alongside of one another. Because we use the term invader versus we learn at schools we share life. That's one of the examples of sharing life is taking the Christians would give their children to the Ottoman Empire for Ottoman Empire to train them so that they can fight for Ottomans. So that kind of shows how bridges, how they build the bridges between different faiths and how they were sharing life together.
Seriously? Somebody wrote this seriously?
As I talked about with someone at Speakers Corner a couple of years back.
That's astonishing because this is just a classic example of striking terror in the enemies of Allah, as the Quran directs. It's the Devshirme is an outrage against humanity and an insult to God. I cannot sugarcoat that. It is one of the most outrageous injustices perpetrated by Islamic jihadis at any time and place. And it's particularly cruel. There's always been Islamic jihadis always kill and rape and enslave. But this is something unique to the Ottomans that was particularly cruel. And the Ottomans actually would go into the Christian towns and they would make all the people, all the villagers and townspeople come to the city square, the town square, with their firstborn. And they would take the firstborn, young children, young boys, and convert them to Islam and raise them to be the Janissaries, the warrior class of the Ottoman Empire. And then the Janissaries would go into those same places where they had been born and where their families were and wage jihad and subjugate these areas or terrorize them further, really, because they were already under the hegemony of the empire.
So it is not those Christians were giving their children for to be trained for the war. They were forcibly taken from them to go and
Yeah.
get with the Christians as the time goes on.
That's an appalling revisionist idea of history to say they voluntarily gave their children to the Turks. You know, even to this day, even the stupid author of that book that I referred to before, who said that it was bigotry to say that any of this had anything to do with Islam, she didn't have any illusions about the Turks. There's still tremendous bitterness and anger toward the Turks among Greeks in the Greek community in the United States. They all understand that the Turks have been particularly cruel and particularly violent toward them. What they don't understand is that this has everything to do with Islam and is not particular to being Turkish. They think the Turks are particularly cruel, heartless, evil people. But they don't understand that that's because of Islam, not because of being Turkish.
So where is the place we can go besides going to Turkish history written by Turks? Where can we go to find out how Ottomans were forcing their religion to places when they were conquering?
Well, there's a lot about the Ottomans in this book, The History of Jihad, that I wrote in 2018. And sorry for the advertisement, but that's the only book that I know of that discusses these things. There's also The Decline of Eastern Christianity Under Islam by Bat-Yaor, which was one of the sources that I used for the history of jihad, and that's an excellent resource. I also plan, after the Muhammad biography, to write a history of the Ottoman Empire, to go with the history of the Byzantine Empire that I wrote earlier and that will be coming out late this year.
Wow.
But that'll take a while.
Lots of resources
What's
for
that?
us. There are lots of resources for us coming to us from you. So
yeah, well, God willing, we'll see.
Yeah, when Ottomans were sharing life with the other nations by invading them and conquering them and then taking their boys, what are the other ways they were forcing religious practices into those nations? So I know, for example, they would transform the churches to mosques. What else? How else they kind of dealt with forcibly converting other faiths to Islam?
Well, of course, the whole idea, the whole superstructure of the Dhimma is designed to get people to convert to Islam. And many did. And so you have, not only do you have the conversion of churches, most notably, of course, Hagia Sophia, which was the greatest cathedral in the Christian world for nearly 1,000 years. But the first thing that Mehmet the Conqueror did when he conquered Constantinople on May 29th, 1453, was send a muezzin into Hagia Sophia to proclaim the Shahada and make it into a mosque, because that was the symbol of the triumph of Islam over Christianity. And there are many other mosques in Constantinople and elsewhere that are old churches. But also all the usual rules of the Dhimma. The Christians can't hold authority over Muslims, so they're relegated to the lowest strata of society. They have to get off the sidewalk if a Muslim is walking toward them out of deference. They can't build new churches or rebuild old ones. The ecumenical patriarch of Constantinople, who is the foremost patriarch of the Orthodox Church, he was, of course, in Hagia Sophia, and then after Hagia Sophia became a mosque, he moved his headquarters to a different church in Constantinople, and then that one was also seized by a later sultan, I believe around 1598, and made into a mosque. And so he moved to a third one, and then in the Fenar, and is still there. But at any time, the Turkish government could say, we want the Fenar now, and he'd have to move again. It's a very precarious existence. And of course, there are very few Christians left altogether. In the 20th century, after the fall, or at the time that the Ottoman Empire was falling and the Turkish nationalists taking over, there was real ethnic cleansing of the Christians that were remaining in the domains of the Turks. And so the ancient Christian communities along the Pontus and along the Aegean that had been there since the time of Homer and before that were expelled. And the population of Constantinople that was 50% Christian in 1914 is now just a few hundred Christians left.
Yeah. Someone is asking if we are stating or if we are saying Ottomans practice jihad, holy war of Islam, then what is our response how Ottomans were allowing to other heretical Islamic groups to still live in there under them? For example, I don't know the English name for that, like Sufis, Mevlana, the ones like just turn around stuff. Like if they were, if Ottomans were practicing jihad, then why would they allow other Islamic sects to live under them?
The Ottomans were very tolerant.
It was.
Just like your sources were saying. And so they had a very expansive, generous view of Islamic orthodoxy. The Sultan was the caliph of all the Muslims, and he would allow, in his magnanimity, allow different sects to live. But this tolerance was never extended to the non-Muslims. And so the idea that the Ottoman Empire was some kind of paradise of multiculturalism is a 21st century fantasy among Westerners who want to reassure people about mass migration into Europe and make them think there's nothing to be concerned about. And really, even to say that is suspect to begin with, because you're talking about an empire in which the Muslims had hegemony. And so is that what you're envisioning for the rest of Europe today? Well, apparently that is, yes.
Yeah, we've got the same problem in UK. Europe, actually, they don't see as a problem, sorry. We've got the same gift.
Diversity is our strength. Yeah.
Yes, we've got the same thing in England, and Europe is the same. And it turns up, I don't know if you followed on the news or not, but it turns up people who are entering the country, giving different age and different background, and then turned up that actually they were fighting for ISIS. They were active supporter of ISIS where they come from.
Gee, what a surprise. Wow. Who could have seen that coming? What a shock.
It was a shock. It was a shock to the media, and then it was on the news only for like few hours, and it's gone. So, would you be able to talk a little bit about how sultans, leader of the Ottoman Empire, had the power to give fatwas?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what you're referring to. I mean, I know that the Sultan was the caliph of all the Muslims, successor of Muhammad as the political, military, and spiritual leader of all the Muslims. And actually, you know, as terms of fatwas, yes, he was the final word. He would deliver an opinion. A fatwa, we should understand, a lot of people don't know this because of the Salman Rushdie fatwa being the most famous fatwa in the West. They think that a fatwa means a death sentence. A fatwa is just a religious ruling on any issue. So yes, the caliph would be the final word on that. But is there a particular one you have in mind?
I was mainly thinking about the Bayezid. No, film like Bayezid, like he's the one like who were fighting with the Serbs, with Serbia, and he like we kind of learned that through in like Turkish history. He's the one like who would kind of bring and introduce the fatwas. Before that, it was not very common for sultans to kind of give religions rulings. I might be wrong on that. I don't trust that much history.
I'm not sure what that is referring to, because the whole power of the Sultan came from the fact that he was the caliph.
Okay.
Right from the beginning. The Abbasid Caliphate was supplanted by the Ottoman Caliphate, and that was the power of the Sultan, that he was the successor of Muhammad. It's interesting to note, actually, though, it's in a little bit of a return, if you'll pardon me, to the previous topic. The tolerance of the Ottomans. This is what led to the Wahhabi revolt. You know, the Wahhabis in Arabia, they rebelled against Ottoman rule because they thought that the caliph was irreligious and was straying from the strict observance of Islam. And Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab in the 1700s thought that the Ottoman Sultan was essentially apostate. And so he went to war to free Arabia from the Ottomans. And this is why we have Saudi Arabia today. Although, of course, the British helped as well. They were very intent on fighting the empire, and so they helped the Arabs against the Turks without really realizing that maybe the people they were helping were going to end up being worse than the ones they were trying to defeat.
So that was beginning of 20th century, 1900s?
Well, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab he died in 1792. And
Okay, so
he freed
1870s.
Arabia from the Ottomans, and the Saudis have ruled in Arabia ever since. But the British allied with the Wahhabi Arabs in the 20th century, around the time of World War I. Lawrence of Arabia was the British colonel who aided the Arabs against the Ottoman Turks. And it was out of that modern day Saudi Arabia was founded.
Before that, it was the Ottoman Sultan, Ottoman Caliph, who would give all the religions rulings until Saudi steps in and then come alongside of with British.
Yeah, the Wahhabis rebelled against the Sultan and said that he had forfeited his authority because he had strayed from Islam. And so they did not consider themselves bound to obey him.
So that is like 700s, 18th century, late 18th century. Ottoman Empire kind of officially finished in 1920 to 1923. How come they survived approximately for 200 years?
Well, that's only Arabia. Arabia rebelled, and this is the time when the Ottomans are known as the sick man of Europe. I don't know if you've heard this phrase. It was in decline. Really? It's very common when you learn about the late Ottoman Empire in the West that this is the time when it was known as the sick man of Europe. And the sick man of Europe was a weakening, declining empire. Now, what nobody ever talks about is that it was weakening and declining because the Christians and Jews had been bled dry. And so you have the subject people, you see, and they have various wealth. And they have to turn over that wealth to the Muslims. That's what the Dhimma system does. And so once those people are completely impoverished, then they cannot pay any longer the sums of money that they were paying. And then the people who were depending on them to pay for everything become poorer. And so the Ottoman Empire went into decline because it had bled dry the Christians and Jews in the empire. And then, because the Ottomans were all mixed up with Europe and they controlled Eastern Europe, although Eastern Europe began to rebel and get its independence in the 19th century. And the Greeks declared their independence in 1821, and some of the others in that area declared their independence. And the Ottomans then, under pressure from the West, abolished the Dhimma, abolished the whole system of dhimmitude in 1852. And so then, even though they continued actually to persecute the Greeks and Armenians and Assyrians, the Christians, they were legally bound not to collect the jizya anymore. And so that only accelerated the decline. because even the little bit that those communities could still pay, now it was off the table. But the Muslims had no work ethic. They were used to living off the Christians. So the empire is losing territory. It's declining economically. It's declining militarily. The last great fatwa was issued for World War I, declaring that World War I was a jihad, that all Muslims should fight. And nobody paid attention. Muslims didn't flock there to fight. Like, you saw ISIS, and Muslims came from 100 countries, thousands of them, to join ISIS. But the Ottoman Caliph, the Ottoman Sultan, declared a jihad for World War I against the English and the French, and nobody showed up. Nobody cared. So the empire was in deep decline, losing territory, losing authority, losing respect. The Wahhabi revolt is just one part of that. And finally, in 1924, the caliphate is abolished by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the Albanian who founded modern secular Turkey.
So, money had a big part of Ottoman Empire to survive. When there was no money, fight started, and also Muslims were fighting against one another as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Wow, that doesn't look like that much peaceful to me at all, or loving, caring, or sharing life at all. Hungary. Do you know anything about relationship between Ottomans and Hungary?
They conquered it.
You mean shared life?
I'm sorry?
We went there to share life by invading them.
Yes. They shared the light of Islam with Hungary. And that was in the run-up to the Siege of Vienna, because before 1683, you have a progression, an advance of Islam, of the Ottomans, into Europe. And so many of the Europeans were very afraid that the Ottomans would conquer the whole continent and end up in France and Britain. And of course, that was, nowadays they love it and they're doing it. But in those days, they thought that would be a terrible outcome, because they knew that this was an aggressive, expansionist, supremacist ideology, and that their people would be subjugated and enslaved and brutalized. And so they didn't welcome the idea. But it looked as if they were unstoppable. They could not do anything in the face of this slow, steady, inexorable advance. The Ottomans took Constantinople and destroyed the empire that had stood between Europe and the Muslims for 800 years. And that was in 1453. Yes, the Siege of Vienna was in 1683. So that's 230 years later. And in between, in those 230 years, they take the Balkans and Hungary. And so Vienna and Austria was the next step. And if they had won in Vienna, then there would have been jihad against Germany, and then jihad against France, and then jihad against Britain, and jihad, of course, the other direction against Scandinavia. And that would have been the complete Islamization of Europe. So the defeat of the Ottoman forces in 1683 at Vienna cannot be downplayed. It's an extraordinarily important event in history, because nowadays the European ideas of human rights and of the dignity of the human person that come from Christianity have gone out all over the world. And they're the basis of the United Nations. The United Nations is not a good organization, but there's no denying that it was based on principles that are derived from the Christian West. And there are numerous other Christian principles that people don't even realize come from Christianity that have gone all over the world and become generally accepted as axiomatic. And none of that would have happened if the Ottomans had conquered Europe. Yes, the Greeks call it the last day of the world, Tuesday, May 29th, 1453.
In Hungary, there is in the capital, in Budapest, there is this, when you look from the distance, you think it is mosque. It has minare, all the, like, the way you would enter the mosque. And then when you go a little bit closer, it is zoo. So it was a mosque. It was a mosque. Soon after, like, Ottomans kind of run out of Hungary, they turned that mosque to zoo, and today it is like used as a zoo. And the brother who was showing me around, he expressed this is how much they love Ottomans. They wanted to turn that mosque to zoo so that they remember how awful Ottomans were.
And of course, croissant, the crescent-shaped pastries that the French and I believe many other Europeans enjoy, are a celebration of the defeat of the Ottomans. Wow. That's how they arose.
So they didn't like, world didn't like Ottomans that much.
No, this is another historical myth, actually. And it's told more often about earlier, the Arabs, not the Turks, that when the Arabs conquered North Africa, conquered Egypt and so on, that they welcomed the Arabs, when the Romans, the Byzantines, welcomed the Arabs as liberators because the Byzantines were oppressive and collected high taxes and so on. These are historical myths. It's extraordinary how thorough Islamic apologists have been in rewriting history and feeding Westerners who don't know history a lot of lies. And that's one of them, along with the idea of a tolerant and peaceful Ottoman Empire and so on. When you read the actual writings of the Arab conquerors in Egypt, they're talking about having to cover the land with troops. And they had to cover the land with troops because people were not happy about the conquest. They wouldn't have needed the troops if they'd been welcomed as liberators. But the Islamic apologists in the modern age have made a systematic effort to cover up all the misdeeds that come from Islamic texts and teachings. And most Westerners have no idea how they're being fooled.
Yeah, in Turkey, or in Muslim majority countries, in a sense, it makes sense because that's like in the textbooks, you read it, everyone else knows or thinks the same thing until you meet with someone who says, oh, that's not historically correct. And then suddenly you start being challenged and you are gently forced into look into real history instead of what you've been taught at schools as history. Any thoughts on, so in 1920s, Ottomans fall and then kind of Republic of Turkey started. Any thoughts on how in 21st century, Republic of Turkey is going back to kind of close steps to Ottomans?
Well, in the first place, it should be noted that the Republic of Turkey has been even worse to the Christians than the Ottomans were, if that were possible. The Republic of Turkey was based on the idea, it still is, that it's the national Turkish state, right? And so it's for the state for the Turks. And what does it mean to be a Turk? Part of the Turkish national identity is to be a Muslim. Yeah. There's no Turkish national identity for the Christians in Constantinople or for the Armenians or the Assyrians. So in the latter part of the Ottoman Empire, the Christians were considered to be Kufar Harbi, infidels at war with Islam. because they wanted independence. The Greeks wanted independence. They won independence in Europe. The European Greeks won independence in 1821. The Greeks in Asia Minor wanted enosis, unity with the Greeks in Europe. And so they were infidels at war with Islam because they were rejecting the authority of the caliph. And so their lives were forfeit. This is why there was the genocide of the Armenians and the Greeks and the Assyrians. It started in the idea that they were rebels from Islam. But the Turkish nationalists continued it because they considered that Islam was part of the Turkish national identity. And so there was no place in Turkey for these non-Muslims. And so they were systematically converted or terrorized, like the massacres in Smyrna in 1955, and driven out of the country altogether, erased. So, and now they don't even remember they were there, like we were discussing before.
Yeah.
So the Republic of Turkey today, under Erdogan, wants to return to the caliphate and restore Islamic law. And if he succeeds in doing that, he will make war on the surrounding states, just like the Ottomans did. And particularly, he's been belligerent against Greece and wants to conquer Greece because Greece is an insult. Greece's very existence is an insult to Turkey because the Greeks rebelled from the rule of the Ottomans and continue to exist as a separate nation. So they have to be crossed off. They have to not exist. And so Egypt as well, but Egypt is not such a high priority because Egypt existed before the Ottomans. There was never an independent state called Greece before the independence of Greece in 1821. There were Greeks there all the way through history, but there wasn't an independent state. And so it has to be erased. And so that's high priority for Erdogan.
I don't know if it's changed or not, but until a few years back, so in Turkey we've got ID cards, and your religion is written in your ID card, and it is Islam. You can't change it. I don't know if that changed, like if it's become flexible or something, but you cannot change it. So yes, even though Turkey is right now identified as a Republic of Turkey, still, if you are born in the border of Turkey, you are Muslim. Doesn't matter you're like you choose it or not, you are Muslim.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. It would be interesting to know because, of course, there is still the Greek Orthodox community in Constantinople. There's the ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew and all the people who live around him. Not very many now, but surely their ID cards, his ID card, he was born in Imvros. They don't say he's a Muslim, I hope, but I don't know. It's an interesting question.
Yeah, like I couldn't change my ID card from Islam to something else. I don't know if that's changed in the last few years, but that always been a problem. So what is the theological differences between Ottomans Islam and Saudi's Islam, or today's Turkey's Islam and Saudi's Islam?
There's no difference. Erdogan himself said that. Erdogan himself said it in August 2021, or a little bit after that, when the Taliban took over Afghanistan again. And he said there's no difference between Islam in Turkey and the Islam of the Taliban. Of course there isn't. It's not as if they read a different Quran. It's not as if they're a different sect. And of course, it's very well known that Turkey aided ISIS while ISIS had its caliphate in Iraq and Syria. And so it's all the same Islam. There are, of course, the ancient sectarian differences, the Sunni and the Shia, the various mystic, the Sufis, like you mentioned before, and all the others, but there are not serious theological differences among these groups. It's mainly a struggle for power, really.
Hunger for power makes people like that.
Yes.
What do you think we can, as a Christians, or we've got like non-Muslim audience who are not Christian. What do you think as a Christian and non-Muslims we can learn from the history of Ottomans?
A great deal about the real view of Islam toward Christians, how Christians live under the Islamic State, how oppressed they are, how deprived of rights, how brutalized and victimized and systematically reduced until ultimately the community of Christians is to disappear altogether. And the Ottomans are not singular in this. This is something that they pursue everywhere, that Muslims pursue everywhere they go, because it's part of the imperative against unbelievers that's in the Quran and the Sunnah. Why are Syrian Muslim refugees causing terror on Turks in Turkey? What is the reason? I don't know. But if you think that this means that one group or the other is not Muslim, then you don't know about Islamic history, which is full of Muslim on Muslim warfare for various reasons. They may dislike them because they're of a different sect. They may dislike them because they don't believe they've been given all that they think they deserve. Any number of things. Or maybe they think that the secular Turks are apostate. But even then, it would all go back to Islamic teaching.
Yeah. Also, sometimes there is a thought of you are better than others. If some people might remember when the people of Iraq and Syria some of them were running away from ISIS. Saudi Arabia and Arab world didn't want them because they said they are emotionally damaged from the war, so they can't take them in their countries. Therefore, those people were kind of coming to Europe to invade Europe.
Also, and the Arabs, they don't like each other. And
yeah.
So this
also,
another
thing happens is when Muslims stop fighting or stop arguing with people of other faith, they turn against each other. We get to see that a lot at Speaker's Corner. Sunnis and Shiites kind of come together and then argue against Christians, but soon after Christians leaves the corner, there's a huge fight between Sunnis and Shiites, between Alevites and Shiites and Sunnis, all kind of come together in different emotion. So that might be another reason. Since it seems there is an encouragement for Europe to support what Erdogan is leading towards, kind of encouraging Turkey to go back to Ottomans, set up that caliphate, or live such a caliphate life. What are your thoughts or your advices could be towards leaders?
Toward leaders?
Yeah, European leaders or Western leaders.
They're idiots. They should resign. All of them. Every last one. They should resign and face criminal charges for what they've done to UK, France, Germany, Italy, all the rest of them. Every last one of them. The mass migration of Muslims into Europe has made Europe more dangerous, poorer, threatens the native population and burdens them with the support of these people who have no intention of working but go on welfare because the non-Muslims have to pay for the upkeep of the Muslims in lieu of paying jizya. If they don't pay the jizya, so they have to pay them welfare, which is jizya. So none of this had to happen. But now Britain, France, Germany, the others, they will have Muslim majorities very soon, with it, but before the end of the century. And then there will be Islamic states in Europe. And none of this had to happen. It happened because the Western leaders opened the doors and brought them in and told the people that they would make up for their aging and declining populations. And so these people are criminals, the leaders of UK, France, Germany, etc., Sweden. They should all be arrested.
Anyone who is encouraging or supporting the ideology leading Turkey forward regarding leading forward caliphate, that is a dangerous, and anyone who supports that kind of end up in that dangerous side as well.
Yes. And what you have here about Armenia and the Armenians of Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh, it's the same thing we were talking about at the beginning of the show, that Muslims come in and they raid and kill and terrorize and drive people from the area. And that's what the Azerbaijanis are trying to do now to the Armenian land of Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh, and drive the Armenians out and conquer and Islamize it. And once then they'll move into Armenia itself and keep trying to do the same thing. And if you look at a map, you see that Armenia is the only non-Muslim land and the non-Muslim Turkish land all the way from Turkey across to the middle of Central Asia. You've got Turkey and then Azerbaijan, which is Turks, and you've got Turkmenistan, which is Turks, and you've got Turkish Muslims, in other words, all the way across from Asia Minor to the middle of Asia, except for Armenia. Armenia is standing in the way of this massive unitary state, and so it has to be destroyed, and that's what's happening. And the Europeans don't care because they don't know. They're busy committing suicide themselves, so they don't have time to think about Armenia. Or they ally with the Azeris because they love this kind of thing.
What is the Islamic justification, for those of us who might not know? What is the Islamic justification for Muslims to not be able to live with the people of other faith in a peaceful way?
Well, there's nothing in the Quran and nothing in Muhammad's words and deeds, nothing in Islamic law about non-Muslims living with Muslims as equals. The imperative is repeatedly said, why did you stop fighting when you have the upper hand? In other words, you should have completed the conquest and destruction of the non-Muslims. Fight until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. And here again, the Quran envisions the Muslims fighting the non-Muslims until they are defeated and submit. And then they live in the society. They're not equal. The Christians are subservient and they support the Muslims, but they do not have the rights the Muslims have. And these are Islamic imperatives. This is the Quran, the holy book, and also it's spelled out in Islamic law. There is no situation in which Islamic law envisions Muslims and non-Muslims living together as equals.
Because Allah, creator of universe, decides this is how it's going to happen, and Muhammad teaches people to follow it according to tradition.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we stop here. There was a Muslim comment. I'll bring this comment as last one. Where is the comment? There is a Mr. Muslim is saying, what is happening is just fulfillment of Allah's promise that Islam will take over the world.
Yeah, that could happen because the true faith tells us that Satan is the god of this world. And so if Satan is the god of this world, then that's really already saying that Allah already has taken over the world. And Islam is just finishing the job. And so, yeah, except that's not the end of the story.
Ideology is acting with the will of Satan, but Christian scripture teaches Jesus Christ overcome it all. He won once for all.
Yes.
So people can continue to dream this.
That's not the ordinary flow of human history. That's something that is the end of history. And it will come as a big surprise to you when you think, oh, Islam has conquered the world and Allah has blessed us and shown the true faith. And then you will see that it wasn't really that way at all.
Yeah.
But anyway, there we are.
Thank you for reminding. Even though Ottomans brought lots of mess to the world by the teachings of Islam and its practices, Jesus Christ, crucified and risen Lord, still on the throne. He rules and reigns, and we will all stand in front of him one day.
Yes.
Thank you very much for joining me this evening, helping us to remember the history of Ottomans and life of Christians under the Ottomans as well. Great history again. So really, really appreciate that. And thank you very much, everyone who joined us in the chat. Is your Jihad Watch back this week? This Wednesday, coming Wednesday?
Yeah, I haven't talked to David. I was on the road this week, but as far as I know, we'll be doing it next week unless David is busy.
Okay, because people might be thinking there is no jihad at all.
You can always go to jihadwatch.org and you'll see it all there. Unfortunately, there's far too much. And don't forget to take your DNA test, Hatun, and then you'll be Hatun Tashopoulos.
Yeah, I'll check that out. I think I can get that down from Oxford as well. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me, and God bless everyone. By God's grace, we will see you on another live stream or at the bosom of the Father. Good evening, everyone.